Our first reading today is going to start us in the book of Job. We're going to spend the next 3 weeks after this in the book of Job. So listen to the introduction to Job and the setting for our story. There once was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. The man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. One day, the heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came along among them to present himself before the Lord. The Lord said to Satan, Where have you come from? Satan answered the Lord, From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. The Lord said to Satan, Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason. Then Satan answered the Lord, Skin for skin, all that people have they will give to save their lives. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, Very well, he is in your power, only spare his life. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job, from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd with which to scrape himself, and sat among the ashes. Then his wife said to him, Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, You speak as any foolish person would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. The gospel of the Lord is to you, O Christ. So I'm going to begin with a question. In the past 19 months now, have you ever said to yourself, why, God, have you brought this COVID-19 pandemic on us? Yeah, or maybe the right question to ask is, how many times have you asked that particular question? Does it trouble you that both good people and bad people have contracted COVID? Does it bother you that this pandemic is creating a worldwide havoc, destroying economies, destroying social settings? If you have been answering yes to one or more of these questions, well, then maybe the book of Job is for you. Today and for the next 3 Sundays, we will take readings from what some would say is the most mysterious book in the Old Testament. Its language is full of difficult to understand words. Its outline and structure, organization are far from obvious. An entire section of the book, chapters 24 through 27, appears to be, just plain disorganized. And there's lots and lots of poetry. So far, it's not then for the faint of heart. Yet the study of Job can be worth it. I hope you will be up for the challenge over the next few weeks with me. Over these 4 Sundays, there are readings from the beginning, the middle, and the end of Job. These readings provide a short synopsis of the book. We read today about Job, who Job is, and the heavenly wager that gets Job into this unthinkable mess. In coming weeks, we will sample Job's bitter complaint to, or maybe you should say against God. We will hear some of God's pointed response. And finally, we will witness Job's restoration to health, wealth, family, and above all, right relationship with God. You will come to see the book is not really about Job per se. The book is the story of Job and is about understanding God. In other words, the book of Job is unabashedly theological in the strictest sense of the word. Being theological in this case means pondering the nature of God and God's way in the world. In fact, the book of Job is usually assigned to the Bible's wisdom literature. Wisdom literature, which includes the Proverbs and Ecclesiastes from the Old Testament and James from the New Testament. This book, like James we just finished with, is very different theologically from these other books. Proverbs, for example, is called the Bible's parade of examples of retributive injustice, meaning it maintains that righteousness is rewarded and sin is punished by God. This theology, in its extreme form, remains today in the form of prosperity gospel preaching and belief, something most of us would not subscribe to. However, if we're honest with ourselves, we from time to time will fall back into a form of this theology of reward and punishment. The writer of Job in this story form tells about God and God's way in the world. In doing so, the writer debunks the accepted worldview of his day, that of retribution theology. Dennis Tucker explains, simply put, this mechanistic worldview of the time understood the events of the world through the lens of causality, meaning that those who act righteously can expect good things to happen, and those who fail to act righteously can expect calamity. Characters in the story, Job, his friends, Elihu, all seek to make sense of what happened to Job using this mechanistic or direct cause and effect worldview. In the end, all of them fail to understand God. According to the book of Job, their failure to understand is not about consequences of what Job did or didn't do, but about their understanding of God and who God is. We will find that even Job only comes to this understanding that is not cause and effect after his encounter with God at the end of the story. In other words, the book of Job is boldly challenging one of the core theological convictions of God's reward and punishment covenant established with Israel. That core conventional thought that God's going to reward and punish Israel based on its behavior. Job's story in the book that bears his name will stake claim that a simplistic view of reward and retribution is theologically inadequate. Over these next few weeks, then, we will delve into this claim that reward and punishment is not the God that we know and the way God works. Now, as we start looking at this book of Job, some other details are given about Job that should not be overlooked. In a more extended reading, we would find that some more interesting details occur. You need to know that the number 10 or multiples of 10 have significance and mean something in terms of perfection and fullness. Job has 7 sons and 3 daughters. 10. Job has 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. 10,000. Job has 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys. 1,000. In material means alone, Job's piety was on full display. He had perfection and fullness. That's how we're supposed to understand him. Yet there's more. We are told that he offers sacrifices to cover the sins of his family. This is all to confirm that Job is blameless and upright, and one who fears God and turned away from evil. Whatever else the audience knows, the audience is to know that the mechanistic worldview of reward and retribution cannot adequately explain the story of what has happened to Job. Now, another detail that's helpful to know, and this is about Satan. In the opening scene of chapter 2, we have a divine council where heavenly beings came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. For us, this Satan conjures up associations with the idea of Satan as used in the New Testament. However, in the Old Testament, Satan had a different meaning. It meant heavenly beings, or humans even, who, as their primary role, was to act as an accuser in God's court. Carol Newsom suggests that in this post-exilic time, which is still 1,000 years before Christ, Satan had come to be designated a particular being in the heavenly court, one whose specific function was to seek out and accuse persons disloyal to God. You can think of this analogy as the district attorney in our times. They're to seek out those who are doing bad things. So in this case, you can view it as Satan's job to ask, does Job fear God for nothing? Does Job fear God, meaning act rightly, because he has been blessed beyond measure? Or would Job fear God if he had nothing at all? These are questions that are foundational to the rest of the book, even though, interestingly, Satan does not reappear in the rest of the book. So as the story goes, Job learns of the loss of oxen and donkeys and sheep and servants. Job's response is certainly not what Satan expected when Job said, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Satan's response to God is, well, you just have not made the stakes high enough. He claims if Job loses his physical health and well-being, Job will curse God to God's face. And so, with God's permission, Satan tries again. He afflicts Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his feet to the crown of his head. Despite the urging of his wife, Job maintains the same position, saying, "Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad?" The narrator of the story summarizes by simply saying, "In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." Satan, with God's permission, had placed the proverbial stick in Job's bicycle spokes, wagering that removing all of Job's blessings, even though sparing his life, will be enough to send Job over the proverbial handlebars and undoing Job's faith. After all, why does Job believe? That's the question for the rest of us to consider also. Why do we believe? Do we believe that faith is like a commodity? There are some who believe through faith they are convinced that good will come, material prosperity, eternal reward, eternal peace, whatever else. For them, when those goods are somehow threatened, then their faith is jeopardized and threatened. This is not Job's position. Job's position and what ours is to be is described by C.S. Lewis. In his Screwtape Letters book, a 20th century author, C.S. Lewis, records the advice of senior devil Screwtape to his nephew, a devil's assistant, Wormwood. Wormwood is trying to undo the faith of a recently converted Christian. At one point, Screwtape, the senior devil, makes the shop talk type observation to his nephew. Our cause, meaning the devil's cause, is never more in danger than when a human, no longer desiring, but still intending to do the enemy's will, meaning God's will look around upon the universe from which every trace of God seems to have vanished and asks, why has God forsaken me? And still obeys. Yes, the believer asks why he has been forsaken and still obeys. For us today, the question of the book of Job is still relevant. What does one do when one's theological doctrine, one's understanding of God, is that the universe runs on the principle of reward and punishment? Fairness is God's system. What does one do when this is clearly at odds with one's experience of the world? Well, we have 3 more Sundays with Job to explore that question. Amen. Let us share our first hymn today, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah.